Hello and a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Donspektor here. Today, finally, with another IEM review. And I have for you today the TKZK Wave. And yeah, this is an IEM I got sent by a company, and here I'm thanking KeepHIFI for sending me this IEM for review. And just to clarify, I have not been paid or asked to say anything positive or negative for that matter about this IEM. So all thoughts, all critique, and all what this thing can do well are definitely my own findings. And I can already give you a small spoiler. It's pretty decent, but... So yeah, and as usual, my review will be starting on the packaging accessories, which I try to keep relatively short. And yeah, this is already the packaging here. Looks pretty normal. Yeah, for like a cheapo IEM, like $40 or something here. That is definitely looking pretty decent. Cardboard's relatively thick. You do get this graph of the weird scaling. Just look at it. This is like 180 decibels up here. 180 decibels! Yeah, alright. So yeah, this is like 10 decibels and it doesn't say anything because it's much too high scaled. Like this graph doesn't mean anything with the scaling. So yeah. When you open it, you get this card saying something in Chinese and here backside of English. Here would be the IEM inside. You do already see the tips which were on there. Then you get the accessory box, which has this nice little thing, so you can actually pull it out. Nice attention to detail, I got to say. Some other boxes, I struggle to remove it. Then we open that, and you get a carrying pouch that is really soft, but also relatively thin, with the logo. And yeah, we have seen some similar things at other IEMs, but this one is really, really soft, so pretty decent. But no carrying case. And then at the bottom, if I can remove it, you do get another selection of tips. And already something before we talk about comfort. Really nice about this IEM, it comes with 4 different sizes. So this is L, then this is M, I think, when you get something like MS or SM or some new S, and this is SS. So that's a pretty good selection. Other IEMs definitely have less. And I do like the inclusion of SS tips because my ear canal is pretty small, and SS tips here would work just fine for me if I wouldn't have had better tips. But yeah, okay, more about that later. So yes, this is pretty much what you get, of course, then with the IEM and the provided cable, about which we talk next. And of course, I'll be starting off with IEM Build. So then let me just quickly remove this bad boy from the cable. Whoop. Whoop, and also pull off the tips so we can actually have a better look at the IEM. Yes, this is the Wave. And yeah, as I said, for a $40 IEM, it is actually pretty damn well made. So the faceplate here definitely looks pretty nice and shiny, and probably the word Wave comes from the wave pattern in here, and it is not as well visible in camera as it would be in real life, but this is in really nice dark green combined with this, I don't know what this color is, like a bluish. Looks really good in real life. And also nice that this pattern is actually in the resin, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. So you will not run into danger in scratching the actual pattern. It's pretty shiny and collects fingerprints, but it's just fingerprints, you can just wipe it off. Then going around here, you see a 2-pin connector. This is the KZ style, I think QDC this is called. Definitely, pretty, also not exactly the most common one, but still pretty standard. It seems to be molded in the resin pretty well, so no problem there. And when we go around the IEM, this is utilizing, and I would say like semi-custom shape. Unlike other IEMs from Tin Audio, because yes, I forgot to say that, this is actually a sub-brand of Tin Audio, or a spin-off, I'm not sure how to call that. And yeah, they wanted to try something else, and this is what they came up with. TKZK, I'm not sure, but that is an abbreviation for, I don't know. So yeah, but continue working over the IEM Build. So generally this is a relatively, I want to say, thick resin, so this IEM is not light. Definitely has a good weight to it. And going to the bottom, you see the L, or on the other side the R marking, with a pressure hole for the dynamic driver in here. And I think there's another pressure hole here, also for the dynamic. because we can already look inside the nozzle. You see that? That is the BA already mounted in the nozzle. And when we talk about the nozzle, that also seems to be molded in here pretty nicely. Definitely in there pretty tight, and I don't feel any seam. Oh, speaking of seam, there's no seam at the top, so this definitely feels better made than, for instance, the KZ here, the DQ6, that has seam going around it. And it generally does not feel, it does not look as like premium as this one. So yeah, I would say the the Wave here is up for a pretty good start. And yeah, build quality wise, I do not have any problems with it. It's actually pretty well made. And that brings us already to the cable. IEM, you go to the side. Because while IEM itself, pretty good. Accessories, definitively solid. I can't say the same for the cable. As you can see, it is not the smoothest one, not the most janky one as well. The blonde cables, definitively worse. But if you have seen cheapo KZ cables, this resembles them pretty closely. And let me just get cheapo KZ cable in the picture. So you can see this is actually still a bit worse than cheapo KZ cables. So first starting off with, this one actually, please note, other producers, strain release, really nice touch. Strain releases at cables actually do release strain and they keep the cable alive for longer. KZ here has a worse strain release, definitely much too hard, not long enough. But the cable thickness in general, you can see that. This is the KZ one, it's just better. It just overall like feels a bit more sturdy as cable. And this one generally is a bit thinner, a bit jankier. But they do have, I think, the same production plant, because look at this used rubber here. It is one-to-one the same rubber. KZ just thought we go for super thick plug, while Tin Audio thought, well, you know, this like wave style thing that actually matches the pattern, that is also a nice attention to detail, is totally enough. And I agree, this one is really well grippable, so no problem here. However, yeah, KZ cable is just a bit thicker, and overall, even for this is now tangled up, but I also just have this motion at some point with it, so yeah, going up to the splitter, let me just show you the splitter quickly. Same rubber material here, KZ splitter on the other hand. Look at that, that is a thick splitter. It's overall like generally like really thick in terms of width, not in terms of length. This one is definitely longer. But again, I appreciate the usage of useful strain releases. Why don't more companies do that? So many times actually cables break either at the bottom here at the plug, or here or here. And then strain release here actually does something. That is something I really want to see more companies do, just making more durable IEMs and more durable packages overall. Of course you can change the cable, but it would be nice if you didn't have to, right? So yeah, then going up from the splitter, there's no chin slider, so that is, well, for some people maybe a bit of a bummer. For me personally, not much. And yeah, generally this is pretty thin, and I don't want to call it brittle directly, but it's not the best cable at this price point. Going to the ear hooks here, those are rubberized, again, pretty heavily, but they have chosen large enough bending angles here, so I think 99% of all ears will not have any problems with this ear hooks. And then last but not least here, QDC connector, standard QDC here, the KZ cable, just a comparison for you, is pretty similar. It has a bit of a tiny bit different angle maybe, but it's so close we can almost call it identical. So yeah, then summarizing cable, it's fine. It's not good for this price point, but it's definitely not blonde levels of bad. So yeah, it's okay. I have no big complaints with here, and I do like the attention to detail with the wave thing here, as well as the strain releases. Really, strain releases, people, that's what you need to have. Okay, then next thing, I quickly go over comfort. So this IEM here, as you might be able to see, it has a pretty thick nozzle. In fact, I did measure it, and it comes up to 5.9 millimeters. And honestly, this is a really thick nozzle. I think only the Moondrop Variations, but I also have got recently, has a thicker nozzle with, I think, 6.4 millimeters. So definitely, if your ear canal is even smaller than mine and you always need SS tips, the wave can be a bit too big for you, I think. For me, however, putting on this pair of SS tips with really wide bore, and maybe on the inside you can see it's like it has like tiny grooves on the inside, so it grips my ear a bit better. With this, I do not have any comfort problems. In fact, I would say it's pretty comfortable IEM once you get the right tip for it. Even some S tips, not even SS tips, did work for me here, but then they have to be more squishy because generally, yeah, this is a pretty thick nozzle. However, the angle of insertion when we talk about it is also been chosen pretty well. It's not exactly flat compared to the surface here. It's like slightly in like bending towards this angle. So combined with the overall semi-custom shape what we go for here, the wave does fit my ear pretty well, and I do not have any comfort complaints with this with most tips I use. So like S and SS tips, most of them work totally fine. It does not manage to be like really like semi-custom shape like the variations that really like variations just putting it in my ear with a really small tip. It fits like a glove. It's perfect. Not exactly that, but it is a really comfortable IEM to my ear, and I do not have any complaints about comfort whatsoever, especially with the included tips. One thing I still want to note, this is tin, right? And compared to the barrel-shaped tins, this is worlds better. This is literally, there's no comparison. This is so much better than the barrel-shaped tins. It's like a complete different universe. But okay, I would say this chapter we can already close. It's pretty comfy, no complaints. So then, next chapter, this one's probably pretty short. Let's talk about isolation. Because with great power comes great responsibility. Oh, wait, no, pardon. With great build comes great isolation. And unfortunately, it's not that great. It does isolate pretty well. So for most occasions, like for the office or when you are on a normal train or even in an empty tram, it would be totally fine. It absorbs most of the noises in medium loud environments. But for like really loud environments, if you are near Main Street, if you're on construction site or near construction site or whatever, it's not going to work well enough. So I would call this is isolating above average, like probably like a bit above average, but it's not really well isolating. So something like, again, Moondrop Variations, which is really massive in build, isolates quite a bit better than this one. But for this price and the general like comfort, it's a pretty well isolating IEM, and it will be suited for most occasions. Okay, next chapter. This is, I think, also pretty short, and we have drivability. Oh, let me just get the BTR5 in the picture. Yes, as I said, drivability. And yeah, the wave, beautiful wave here, comes in at, according to spec, 22 ohms at 110 decibels. So this on paper means you can drive it of almost anything, because 110 decibels at 22 ohms is pretty efficient. In real life, yeah, it means exactly the same. It doesn't really matter where you plug it in, it gets really loud, and even better, you do not really need a better amplification to get most of this IEM. This means something like my smartphone, which records this video here, my S9 Plus, so not the used model, drives this pretty much sufficiently. Cheapo USB-C dongles I had lying around also doing a pretty nice job. And going up to the BTR5 here doesn't really improve much. Guess it gets a bit better, but really just minor details. I think you definitely, do get probably a bit, you do get a bit better separation, you do get more details out of it, but it's not much. So really we are talking about here, I would say like you get 90 to 95% on smartphone or cheapo dongle. And then with BTR5 you get like the 100, and something like my SMSL SP200, which has quite a bit more power, does not anything. Really, I couldn't tell you if this was an SP200 or anything else, besides from the SP200 being pretty clean and very neutral in comparison to the BTR5 here. So yeah, drivability, no problem driving it off anything you plug it in, laptop, smartphone, dongle, doesn't matter, it will sound pretty good out of that. And then we talk about sound. Let's already come to the core part here. And yeah, first again, I measured this IEM with a standard IEC 711 clone microphone or coupler. I tried to normalize it at 77 decibels around 1K, and it has usually in smoothing of 112. So yeah, if you want to know more about it, I have a video of how I measure stuff. I'll be linking that in the description. So yeah, general sound characteristics. How does the IEM sound? So generally when we talk about the wave, we mean it is a pretty bright IEM. It is not exactly U-shape, I want to say, but it's something goes in this kind of direction, meaning it does have a boost in the lower frequencies, or like lowest frequencies, and at the highest frequencies. And in practice, this means there's a steady rise from the mids to the lows, just a pretty steady but slow rise. So just on the graph, what you do get is a pretty good sub-bass with like an extension all the way to 20 Hz. And you also get a pretty good extension in the treble region with not exactly 20K, but at least to the graph, which after 10K is not really reliable, but also to my ear, it does extend pretty reasonably. And yeah, it is pretty bright, but yeah, more about that when we talk about the actual sound details. And as usual, I'll be starting off with treble. So according to graph, I still have it on here hopefully, this has an peak after 10K. At approximately like 11K also according to graph, but really the graphs on with this coupler are not that accurate, so we should only get from it there is probably in peak, and according to my ear, yes, there actually is in peak. This makes this IEM come off as a bit, I want to say, like grainy, especially if you have songs that utilizes more than 10K in frequencies. You can notice there's a bit of like unnatural grain going on. So I did notice, for example, Multivitamin Juice Part 1 and 2 from Ovain, or something like Fusion Jazz from Hiromasa Suzuki, the album High Flying, which I can highly recommend, and here the song High Flying. They do come off as, yeah, grainy in the upper treble department. Not natural, but because of this like feeling, or like of this grain feeling, it does, to my ear at least, come off as more detailed than most other IEMs at this price point. Probably due to the BA directly in the announcer, that just gives it, yeah, more like detailed feeling. Yeah, going a bit further down from here to like 8 to 9K, they are certainly in peak between 8 and 9K. And especially if you look at the graph, that they're like, it's not exactly an 8K peak, but keep in mind that there's a resonancy frequency here. And yes, there will be in peak at 8K, and it is absolutely noticeable. It can make certain electric guitars or cymbals or even some vocals, it does make them pretty sharp. With this thing, or like with the like width of the boost here, I did not notice it to be absolutely sibilant, but when we talk about mids later on, there is definitely something that you can call sibilance here, especially for female vocals. But it really is more about mids. I go about that a bit later on. So yeah, mid-treble can be a bit spicy here, definitely. I do not like this peak at 8 or 9K, but this, however, does is cymbals. They have a pretty nice splash quality to them. So if you like cymbals, this will be a nice thing, because they are represented pretty nice and splashy, and yeah, this is pretty decent, but for my taste, it's a bit too much. For example, in Zero from Sidewalks and Skeletons, there they have cymbals and they have this like electronic noise in between. I can only tell it's like an electronic noise. It's just too much. It just is an amplitude too much, and adding this grain, it doesn't work to my ear. You might like it, but for me, it's just too sharp. I don't really like this peakiness. Yeah, going a bit further down from here, there's a dip according to graph, and my ear, you can tell you, it's not really noticeable, this dip. Like, maybe if you just listen to like piano music or something that utilizes pretty good amount of notes in this region, you can, but to my ear, I just didn't notice there's a big peak. It just came off as me as relatively like, not flat, but like it is a decent extended here. So I didn't have any problems with the lower treble, or like mid treble, like lower mid treble to low treble regions. And then brings me to the mids. As already said, for upper mids, yeah, this one unfortunately has sibilance, especially female vocals, and really rarely male vocals can be a bit sibilant. Again here, Zero from Sidewalks and Skeletons is a good example. We have a female vocalist that definitely comes off here as too much, just and too much in most times. Another example I want to give you is Depressive Ghosts from Nightcrawler, which has exactly the same story. Even when we go for something smoother like Weight of the World from the Nier Automata soundtrack, still comes off as a bit too much in sibilance. It's not as bad as the other few examples before, but it's still noticeable. And if you are sensitive to this sibilance, for example, if you're not like me and you haven't experienced Bayer peak for literally like 5 years or so, it can be probably pretty annoying. However, if you are like me and you have literally experienced Bayer peaks for like years, it's not as bad. Like, it is not really nice, but it does not really annoy me that much. And that already brings me to the main mids, like the mid-mids. And here the Wave does a pretty nice job. They come off as well pronounced, overall pretty good balanced, and yeah, also instruments happening in the mids, everything works totally fine for me. I noted here, Volbeats, Cape of the Hero, totally like with this one. Similar story for, yeah, more classic metal like Iron Maiden with Blood Brothers or Brave New World. Worked pretty well, no problem, and yeah, only again slight imbalance in terms of cymbals to vocals, but it really is not, for this price, absolutely no point of critique here. Then a bit going further down to the lower mids, yeah, as I told you, like the slope slowly starts to rise here, and I got to be honest, it's not as much noticeable as I thought it would be. So yes, bass guitars or with higher bass guitar notes and lower pitched vocals do have a pretty good presence, but they do not overpower the mid-mids or the main mids. And yeah, it just all stays pretty much with a nice balance and frequencies over the whole mid spectrum, besides of course a tiny bit of sibilance. I did not find any shout or anything, so yeah, really mids were pretty good. Not the most natural sounding, but yeah, it's pretty good pronounced and pretty fun most of the time. Which brings me to the bass. And in my written review, I might come off here as a bit, I want to say more, critical maybe. But while just speaking about it and listening to a bit more, I got to be honest, the bass here is pretty well tuned. And technically also better than I thought it would be when I started first listening to it. You just have to get used to something that will be an extra chapter before the verdict later on. So yeah, starting off, of course, with mid bass, and yeah, with upper bass. And yes, upper bass is again rising, so you don't get the best pronunciation, for example, of bass guitars, but that's not really a problem because it overall has a nice balance. And for songs like After the Rain from the Bird's Eye View, bass guitars were pretty pleasant, nicely balanced, and yeah, they were just lacking a bit behind the brightish nature of this IEM. But no problem, because mid bass, it actually, even for the graph doesn't indicate, it packs in pretty good punch, which makes the bass drop at the beginning of Skeletons in the Attic from Dance with the Dead pretty good. And the following bass line also worked nicely. It is not an overpowering mid bass, keep you in mind, this is definitely something where you notice it's still sloping or still rising to the sub bass. And it does pack in pretty good speed for this price and also in decent texture. Honestly, I really haven't expected when just looking at the graph that the bass actually is this well. And yeah, this is also noticeable when you have lower pitched bass notes, for example, again, Depressive Ghosts. Yeah, again, same thing, lower pitched bass notes work pretty nice, and yeah, you do get the benefit of the sub bass shelf that you get with this IEM. Yeah, which brings me to the last point about sound in general, and this would be sub bass. And according to graph, I hopefully have it on here again, this extends all the way to 20 Hz in this direction. However, in real life, it unfortunately just doesn't come off as that. So to my ear, this is dropping already its last notes or last distinguishable notes at 2 minutes 13 to 2 minutes 14 in Interstellar's Mountains. And that means you do get a pretty decent sub bass, but it's really not as good as the graph might indicate. And it doesn't really change with other chips, it always is the same sub bass, not in strong point. Mid bass is pretty tight and fast, but sub bass it really is there, but really you don't get much texture out of it. And that brings me to the next thing, which would be soundstage, layering, imaging, and probably also dynamics. So this IEM struggles a bit in my opinion in the dynamics department. Most more quiet notes, at least in the stuff I'm listening, so jazz, fusion jazz, and then we have a bit of metal in between and movie soundtracks. it comes off as not really like dynamic in terms of like how well it preserves microdynamics. Other cheap IEMs at this price point manage a bit better, but microdynamics, however, it does manage pretty well. So if something is quiet and something is pretty loud, you can distinguish these pretty nicely. And yeah, same I would also say is true for the lowest and highest notes. Those are distinguishable pretty well, and you do get all of the dynamics in most songs. Sound staging, I thought, was pretty natural. Like, it has a roundish shape around both of your ears with approximately the same height and width, and total size is also pretty like wide and big enough for this price point. I would say it's above average, which is pretty good for this price, but it is not going to be an IEM that you put in here and say, oh my god, this has a wide soundstage. It's good, but not that good. And yeah, this brings me to layering, and yeah, when we talk about layering, it's good news, ladies and gentlemen, because the Wave does manage most of the time to have 5 layers. This means you have the center layer, you have a layer like left and right, like usually on the height of the ear, and you also most of the time get an outside layer left and right, which is definitely something most other IEMs at this price point do not manage. And it's also what I did like about the Wave when we talk about the way how it preserves the imaging later on. Because vocals, while most of the time being pretty central, when you get like instruments here and here, and then sometimes you get instruments here and there, and it's like pretty well balanced overall. However, and I'm sorry I have to talk about it, but there's a big negative point with the Wave, and this is coherence. I'm not sure how many of my viewers are that much into hybrid IEMs, and most of the hybrid IEMs I've reviewed so far, I did not talk anything about coherence. Why? Because it didn't matter. I did not notice any incoherence, so there's no matter in talking about something coherent when everything is coherent to you. This is something I keep as granted for most IEMs. And unfortunately, what the Wave is really bad is coherence. This means if you have treble notes and bass notes, it always sounds disjointed. You always have the feeling, this is VBA here, this is VBA, and this is the dynamic. They sound completely different. And it does hurt me to say this big point of critique, because otherwise I do like it. Just EQ the treble like 8K, and after that a bit down, it would be pretty nicely tuned. But then there comes the coherence issue. I'm not sure if this is based to the BA being in the nozzle, or if it is because of the 8K peak and above there. I haven't pinpointed it, but really it has really bad coherence. So this means, for example, voice in my head, not coherent, really not good. A 0 from Sidewalks and Skeletons, with its sharp treble notes and the bass note totally disjointed. Sound really was not great. All of In My Hands from Metallica, S&M2, the version here, also not sounding natural. It wasn't as bad, but it keeps on coming. Like, I could give you at least probably like 50 more songs and it'd all be the same story. It's just not in coherent tuning or like in coherent experience you get with these drivers. And yeah, I think you can live with it, but honestly, if you ask me, I would prefer a bit more smooth picture with less details if it is more coherent. But this is really something, we'll be talking now about over the verdict. And my verdict for the Wave is, in the end, I would really like to recommend you the Wave. I like its tuning, I like its comfort, I like its fit. It does look more expensive than it actually is. And you get 4 different pairs of tips, which are totally fine. And you do get a traveling pouch with a pretty, subpar cable, but it's still fine. However, then you do get the coherence issue. And this is something that did not nag me for my first hours when I listened to it, but the more I listened to the Wave, the more the coherence, like, it really went off my nerves. And this might not be a big thing for you, because if you just want to have a relatively well-tuned brightish IEM with a pretty still nice bass line without having a powerful bass, this is just it has a good punch to it, but it's not powerful. It will not be like the blonde BLO3. It goes more in this like neutral-ish, like slightly U-shape-ish direction. But the main problem of the Wave, and now I have to get it in the picture. The main problem of the Wave is the HZ sound hard mirror. When I talk in my next review about this one, I will be talking about, of course, like how this sounds. And the main problem is the hard mirror is tuned relatively close. It does not have the bass shelf, so it really wants to be like neutral bright, like really no bass at all. But it just sounds so much more coherent. It sounds so much more natural. Like really, when I go A to B comparison between these two, I would take this in every day of the week. The coherence is so much better here, and the neutralness, especially in the vocal department, and the not sibilants, it is much more my cup of tea than the Wave here. Which again is not to say the Wave is bad, it's not. It does manage to sound more detailed than it actually, like when most IEMs at this price are. It is well built, it does have a pretty decent packaging. Just the incoherence is really something I can't live with over the long term. You might, but I can't. And yeah, I think before I keep rambling here, yes, this is my review for the Wave. I would recommend it if you don't mind the coherence and if you don't mind the fake nozzle. And yeah, if you have any critique, if you have questions, if you have feedback, really please leave a comment here. And with this, I already say, Donspektor out.